This is being called a vote bonanza budget. The big question is, in election cycle, with a few weeks to go for the mega 2019 general elections, does this budget make the task of re-election for the Modi Sarkar easier, or will these sobs fail to deliver electoral dividends? Let me put that question to Sumant Sinha first.
Well, that's a very political question.
Yes, what do you sense of it? You come from a strong political background, apart from a strong corporate background, you have a sense of it.
No, look, I think that this budget, was a good one in the sense that it addressed a lot of, let's say, vote banks. It addressed the farmer issue, it addressed middle class aspirations, it talked about casual laborers with the pension scheme. So I think the government went out of its way to try to address fairly large pockets of people, and I think that's fine, because all of these people, all of these different entities or groups actually needed some bit of help or the other. And I think all said and done, if it can be done without really costing the government that much in terms of fiscal costs, then I think it's eminently to be done. So I think from that standpoint, it's a very positive budget. I think the other thing the government did in this budget was really talk about its plans for the future, which I think, as I said, also gives us some sense of what the future might look like.
But there is an interesting view in the RSS and in the Sangh Parivar that the Yug, the rule of a great king or a great ruler, goes on for about 15 years. 5 of which are over. Narendra Modi and the Sangh think of Prime Minister Modi as a great ruler in the pantheon of Indian rulers, and therefore there are 10 more years to go. So what Piyush Goyal did was present an agenda for the next 10 years. He didn't attach cost to it, but he presented a vision statement. What would you call that? Audacity, hype, overconfidence, or do you believe it's good for corporate India and the voters to know what would they do, or would you say they could have just held it back for the manifesto?
Two comments on this. I'm pretty sure you've seen CII's India at 75 statement, by the way, which was started by Professor C.K. Prahlad, and we've been working on this for the last 20 years. Actually, I think it's pretty similar to that statement. Every nation which is progressing at the rate we are, and I'm not talking of governments now, I'm not talking of parties, I'm talking about India as a whole, needs to have a vision statement. And it needs to have a buy-in from major players in the country, political parties, civil society, industry, to have some alignment. And if you can agree on a minimum agenda of 5 to 7 to 10 items, it is useful for all political parties, regardless whether they're in government or opposition, to support those inside and outside the parliament. I hope and wish we can create a common vision statement. And all the things he said, by the way, they sound good.
Would the Congress support the common vision statement put out by Minister Goyal?
It needs to be done together.
See, every political party in India is about nation building. We all want to take the nation forward. But in a democracy, every 5 years, voters get to decide how much have we fulfilled. Prime Minister Modi in 2014 sold a development model of 2 crore jobs, 15 lakh rupees, doubling farmers' income. And Indian voters have completely the right and the authority in 2 months from now to decide whether enough was done or not.
The minister on these 2 big promises. 2 crore jobs said in the heat and dust of a campaign. You know, you can keep saying it was never part of the manifesto, but the promise was made during the campaign. Second, doubling farmer income by 2022. The speed at which farm income is rising, it will be decades beyond 2022 for us to be able to double farm income. So they'll say those were jumlas, you didn't deliver.
Rahul, you are wrong, and Gaurav is sadly wrong on many counts. We don't have time to get into all the untruths that he's uttered, including not breaking the bank. The UPA broke the banks, they broke the financial system, they did all of that. What he's talking about as statements that were made by us are utterly untrue. They have been taken out of context and are being used to peddle their political narrative. But let's not get into that political slanging match. I think what we have to ask ourselves is, the vision that was laid out in the budget, is that a vision that is a purposeful vision, that is enthusiastically appreciated by a variety of stakeholders, and sets a pathway for India to become a prosperous middle income country where everybody is leading a better life. I think that's the conversation we should be having. There will be a time for political slanging, which I can do as well.
No, but farm incomes will be doubled by 2022.
That has
was your promise.
So, yes, of course, and I'll explain how you need to understand that. So that is a promise that the Honorable Prime Minister has made for 2022. And farm income does not just include agricultural wages. Part of, again, what Gaurav is saying wrongly is to talk about agricultural wages. When you look at household income in the rural areas, which is what we are really talking about when we talk about 2022, that comes from many different sources, not just agricultural wages. It also comes from horticulture, it comes from murgi palan, it comes from dairying, it comes from people working outside the farm as well. And so when you include all of those different sources of income, the rate at which we are growing is actually going to get us to that doubling of farmer household incomes. And you also know from actual data, NABARD and others have already shown that agricultural wages for rural families now are only about 40 to 50% of their income. A lot of their income is non-agricultural today, and those are the kinds of sources that we are building up, and that's why we're pretty confident about that particular number. Now, with respect to the other ones, I think those are just statements that the opposition throws around. Those are not in our manifesto or anywhere else, and whatever we are saying that we will do, we said, for example, that we would get electricity to every single home. We've done that. So whichever promises are documented, which we have said responsibly, we are delivering on those.
No, but there are promises, Ajay Singh, that have been kept, and the promises that haven't. The government says that they need another term to be able, they've laid the structure, they need another term to be able to execute those promises. Gaurav Gogoi will say, look at the promises that haven't been fulfilled. The government will say, look at the promises we have fulfilled. It's about convincing the voter. In the end, it's about messaging and convincing the voter.
And the Honorable Finance Minister, my friend Mr. Piyush Goyal, rightly used this platform to convey his message to the voters. Let me say that in terms of achievements, this government probably is unparalleled. Have they not done some things? Of course they have not done some things. You know, are there problems? Of course there are problems. You know, I think amongst the problems is this whole issue of, what happens if there is a business failure. On one side you're saying, let's be entrepreneurial, let's take risks. But then if you fail in a business, instead of getting the tax breaks of the sort that Sunil was talking about, you're actually hounded. So there are problems which we need to fix.
Okay, let the minister respond. That's a good point, that you want to send out a tough message to corporates that, if you try and swindle the system, will come for you. And that's where someone like a Gadkari has a different opinion, that you have to differentiate between business failure and business fraud.
No, Rahul, that's entirely correct, and all of us who have been involved in business for a very long time understand the difference between somebody who suffers a business failure because of various sort of decisions they made or external conditions, and somebody who's a willful defaulter who has actually swindled and embezzled. That decision is very, very clear, and that decision is the way we are moving forward on that. I think what Ajay is correctly alluding to is the fact that the tax policies, and we discussed the angel tax as well, have to be set up in a fine-grained enough way, in a nuanced way, so that we can distinguish between where somebody has had a genuine business failure through no fault of their own, and others where people have swindled and embezzled money. So
do you think the lines are getting blurred between the both of them?
I think so. I think so. I think
so your friend is saying this.
This distinction needs to be clearer. I think one of the great things about this budget also was the step that he took, and where he said that they will actually automate income tax assessments. This has been a big pain point for everybody, and this will go towards easing,
I think that as business. Chartered accountant, Piyush Goyal realizes, obviously more than most others, the pain of having to deal with a tax officer. And I won't call him a tax terrorist, but a tax officer. And there, Sunil Munjal, this promise that in 2 years, a vast majority, if not all the tax returns, will be handled by anonymous tax officers. They don't know whose return is coming to them. You don't know who that officer is. You don't have a number. You don't have an office. You don't have to go and bribe him. That's a big deal.
It is. Actually, the complaint against India for very long has been that when people come from outside to India, they look around and they say, you have 3 problems. Lack of physical infrastructure, too much red tape, and corruption in the system. And if you look at the last 2, they come from excessive physical interface between industry and government and citizen and government. It's at the point of physical contact that there is friction, there's delay, and there's corruption, and all kinds of problems come up. The moment you start to automate the system, you digitize the system, you actually take away and whole potential for problem and friction. And I think that's a big step forward. This is what we've been actually asking for the last many years. Please automate all the systems, remove the physical contact between all of us and government. Make it automatics, make it rule-based. That's also important, by the way. When you automate it, how does it function? So the moment you make it rule-based,
Mr. Tharani, do you agree that this is indeed a big step in the right direction, where you don't have to deal with a tax officer, he doesn't know who you are, you don't know who he is, and therefore, hopefully, fingers crossed, the taxpayer's life is easier?
I'll just repeat my past statement. Technology is beginning to solve real problems.
And it's great for companies like NIH.
It's great for individuals. First of all, it's actually first going to benefit the small taxpayer, correct? But then it will take away that much of headache from his life, so that he is able to focus on growing his business.
Now,
so to that
this issue isn't of direct interest to any of the guests who have over here, but has generated a lot of chatter, and I want the minister to respond to this, that when the minister said that those earning up to 5 lakh rupees won't have to pay tax, everybody thought, okay, hey, the exemption limits have gone up. Then the word rebate came to hound everybody, and it turned out that you still have to file, but it's not as if the exemption levels have gone up. Did the government try and do some jiggery pokery there?
No, not at all, Rahul. We were very clear that people whose incomes are below 5 lakhs, and if you add the exemptions and deductions, you can get up close to almost 7-8 lakhs, that they will not have to pay any tax. However, they will continue to be in the tax net, in the sense that we will be tracking them. That's been, in fact, one of the great successes of this government, is to increase the tax net, increase the tax base to 6.8 crore tax base. So we want them in the tax net. We want them to be formalized. We want them to be people that we can track over time. But at the same time, they don't have to pay taxes as long as their income is below this 7-8 lakhs that I was
And you can't
about.
quibble about that, because if you give everybody an exemption, then they're out of the net. At least this way, they leave a financial trail. You can track what other expenses they have, and if they're actually earning much more and hiding that income, you can catch them.
Well, first of all, sometimes I feel the government, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is saying, because some are saying that it's a rebate. Some are saying that no, it's an exemption. So I think the government
I think the
is not
Secretary of Department of External Affairs has clarified, plus the minister himself used the word rebate.
Secondly, when it comes to tax avoidance, there are some big glaring issues which in front of the public eye. And those are people who have looted Indian public money and are now evaders, and they're outside. And this government said, na khaunga, na khane dunga. Now, what I'm saying this, because it's the Prime Minister of our country who himself said of being tough on corruption, and we have all these tax evaders. In fact, now you have a Union Finance Minister who's writing blog on an ongoing investigation. This just sends the wrong kind of signal. In the end, if the legacy of this 5-year government, and I'm sure that this government is not going to be 10-year, it's a 5-year government, you know, you might have as many annual discussions and have as many annual representatives from industry coming in. 10 years down the line, people of India, the only one thing that they will remember this 5-year government is demonetization. Something that was done at whimsical, it destroyed the economy, destroyed jobs.
I want to hear what Jayant Sinha has to say about this.
And the GDP, as per the government, seems to have jumped after that.
When I interviewed Geeta Gopinath recently, she said no sensible macroeconomist in the world can today say in retrospect that demonetization was a wise idea. Would this in retrospect be the biggest mistake of the Modi government?
Absolutely not, Rahul. And I would say to any macroeconomist or any economist for that matter, that if they have already formed an opinion on demonetization, then they're not true scientists. Because 100 PhDs are going to have to get written over the next 20 years to know ceteris paribus whether in fact it was positive or negative. Anybody who makes a negative case, and I'd be happy to debate Geeta Gopinath or anyone else for that matter on this particular topic, I can make an equally plausible case on the positive, whether it's the formalization of the economy, the reduction in inflation, the increase in CASA deposits, whether it's the increase in taxes that are being paid. There are many, many positive things that have happened.
Okay,
the financialization of assets, the stock market went up. There are 100 different ways in which demonetization has been very profound. Now, I'll make one final point.
But I can't believe you said that stock market went up, because the market went up and it also came down.
Hold on.
Medium and small cap stocks were overheated. Okay, price earning multiples weren't in keeping with their actual performance, and that bubble went burst.
Every asset manager will tell you that the influx of money coming into mutual funds, because people were initially using their money and parking it in gold and real estate, that financialization has meant that there is a steady inflow of money coming into the stock market. Everybody will tell you that. But let me just add one final point, Rahul, which is an important point I want everybody around the panel, including my good friend Gaurav, to understand, which is that, and this is something that the macroeconomists will not pick up, but the behavioral economists will pick up, which is that there has been a fundamental change in tax compliance behavior. Everybody now understands that they are going to have to pay taxes. That's why tax to GDP has gone up 2%. Now, if the macroeconomists don't understand it, the behavioral economists do. That is a profound structural change in tax paying behavior in this country. Who has calculated that?
So, Rahul,
let me ask the question. So the question is very straight.
Yeah.
When you look back, and this government is now coming to the end of its first term, Gaurav Gogoi believes its only term, will demonetization be considered its biggest mistake, or the one step that set India in the direction of a greater fundamental formalization of what had so far been an informal economy?
I think it's both. The implementation was very painful. People suffered, people complained, but the net result of that actually has been very positive. So if you step back, if you were in the middle of it, it was very painful for many people. Okay? Because we did not even plan that you need to change the cassette of the ATM machine for a note which is a different size. So it took a long time for notes to come back. People suffered, they couldn't get cash, even for daily events and stuff. So there were many anecdotal stories which actually grab headlines.
No, but the NSSO
but the end result
suggests that we could be at 45-year high unemployment rates.
Again, I don't know what the data is. I responded to that question already about where I think jobs are. I think we are talking of not lack of jobs, we are talking of lack of the requisite skills for the jobs that India has and India is creating. And by the way, we have to create skills for the jobs which we will get tomorrow, not only today.
Gaurav Gogoi says
that's the point getting
that this
missed again.
government will be remembered for a debacle called demonetization. The minister defends the move very strongly, saying time will prove us right.
Look, I agree with Sunil. Firstly, a government which works is the one that makes some mistakes.
So you think it's a mistake?
No.
No, one straight.
Let me tell you.
Is it a mistake or not?
Let me just say, look, let me just say that perhaps the objectives with which demonetization was done was not the outcome of demonetization. So I think it was presumed
no,
at
but
that
where
point
you
of
end
time
up is not where you wanted to be. You're a business tycoon, you know that's a mistake.
So
that's a bad business plan.
So I think that when they went into this demonetization process, they thought that a lot of money was not coming back, and therefore there would be a benefit to the RBI and the government in some way. That didn't really happen. So in that sense, you can say it was a mistake. But as I've said, a government which tries these out of the box things is the one which will
That's Ajay saying, making a very strong pitch for the Indian Foreign Services, couching his criticism in the most diplomatic fashion as is humanly possible. Let me put that question to Suman Sinha and see whether he's on this side of the fence or that.
No, actually, I think the answer is very simple. I think it's too early to tell if demonetization is actually going to be successful or not. No, I don't think so. I think what Sunil said is absolutely right. That people who lived through it, and all of us did, found it very painful. I think Jayant has also made some valid points that there has been some improvement in the formalization elements. Now, whether the good outweighs the bad, I think only further perspective is going to be able to tell.
I think there's enough perspective already.
No, I don't think so. I really don't think that we have all the data, because a lot of this formalization is going to play itself out over the next several years.
But Jayant Sinha made one very important point, and I don't think anybody can contest that earlier the attitude in India was you don't need to pay taxes, that chalta hai, nahi pay karna. Now the attitude is at the very least pay the minimum tax that you have to, otherwise Modi is going to come for you. There is a change in attitude. It's not a...
I can tell you that people like us, we used to carry cash around all over the place, and now we don't carry... Actually, you look at it, in actual fact, you can't argue with the fact that the tax base has gone up from that 3.6 crore to 6.8 crores. Many more people use digital money than they ever did in the past. There's no question about it, though.
What is the alternative solution? Nobody is talking about, let's say this didn't happen. How would you bring that transparency in the system? How do you cut down the cash? What is the alternate solution? You can criticize demonetization, it had its pain, but what is the alternate solution?
Maybe you could have done it more slowly. That's, I guess, the only thing that you could have said.
But I'm saying, what is the alternate solution?
That's
so Gaurav Gogoi, we're running out of time on this broadcast, but I want final words. This is an important point, because if, Manmohan Singh said, history will judge me more kindly. The government is saying demonetization, time will judge more favorably. Don't just go by this NSSO data. It's not the final verdict.
So demonetization knocked off more than 1% of the GDP. More than 100 people have lost their lives, lots of jobs, informal sector. And if for all of this, if the government is saying it's all justified because we've got more taxpayers in the net, I think if we had started with that original intention, that we want to get more people in the tax-paying net, and let's identify the various measures, demonetization would not be in the limit, would not be in the list at all. This is just a justification. It's like saying India has a population problem, so if there is flood and people die, so it's a good thing. That's what happened. More than 100
Ajay
people lost
Singh
their
said
lives,
the
1%
outcome wasn't
GDP
what
off,
you'd
lakhs of
expected.
jobs gone.
That's a bad business plan.
Rahul, that's absolutely untrue. Gaurav's language is always very inflammatory. That is not the case. The question on demonetization is whether you look at it from a political point of view, which is what Gaurav is doing and he's spinning rhetoric around it, or whether you look at it from a scientific perspective. I'm saying as a scientist and as somebody who believes in numbers and facts and logic.
Earlier you said you were
I'm
not a
sorry,
scientist.
Gaurav,
When
I
you were
don't
talking about NSO.
No. I said I'm looking at it, my perspective is a scientific perspective. I'm not a data scientist is what I said earlier. I said if you look at it from a scientific perspective and you apply that logic, which is what I would like to apply in this particular case, I don't think anyone can come to a conclusion right now. And anybody who does is venturing into political territory. Now, as I said, you can make a case for why it wasn't right. I can make an equally plausible case as to why it is right. Now, whether I am correct or the other person is correct depends on your political view, but no scientific conclusion can be arrived at. There have been very significant advantages, and the impact of behavioral change, which requires shock therapy, Rahul, you cannot get behavioral modification without shock therapy. It has to be painful. What the long-term cumulative impact of that is in terms of GDP, even if we increase GDP by 0.2%, you amortize that over 50 years, 100 years, that's far more than 1.5% of GDP. Okay, so I think one can make very plausible cases on both sides. If you take the scientific perspective is you can't tell at this stage.
I want a final word on the man who was sent in the pinch, in the end over, slog overs to go and bat for the Modi government. He came in as a night batsman because the main batsman was retired hurt and not batting today, becoming the first qualified chartered accountant to deliver a union budget, even if it's an interim budget. That was a tough ask, Suman Sinha. How did Piyush Goyal do vis-a-vis Arun Jaitley?
Well, I can't do a comparison, obviously, but I think what Piyush Goyal did today was actually fairly good. I think he was fairly positive and strong in the way he delivered the budget. And I think he seemed that he was to the manner born, as if, that was something that he's done many times before. And I think all in all, it was a strong performance from him.
He's a numbers man and was sent in with a tough ask to try and forget what corporates think. The ultimate thing is what does the Kisan think, what does the middle class think. He's the one who's deciding whether the minister will end up on this side of the fence or that next time. How did he do in your view?
So, again, I think it's an unfair comparison. Arun Jaitley is a much more seasoned politician, that's for sure. But Piyush, as you said, he's an accountant. He's a chartered accountant. He understands numbers. So his ability to express numbers is clearly more than any of us actually around this table. So I think and I don't think the budget was made without Arun Jaitley, by the way. The budget doesn't get made in a day or a week. This is a budget of not just Arun Jaitley. This is a budget of Prime Minister Modi and Arun Jaitley going into an election. So Piyush Goyal on that account did a pretty good job. Standing up and not making it sound populist while announcing a number of schemes a few months ahead of the budget, before the elections.
Look, this is a budget of the Modi government. But I think Piyush did a fabulous job, really fabulous job in going and trying to bring benefit to sections of such a wide section of society, the farmers, the unorganized, the workers in the unorganized sector, the middle class, so many people, and at the same time remaining fiscally responsible. I think that was the key. The fact that he managed to retain the fiscal deficit at 3.4%, I think was absolutely wonderful, and I think Piyush did an absolutely fabulous job.
Okay, so everyone has spoken. Where you stand on demonetization, where you stand on the vote bonanza budget really is for you to decide. Piyush Goyal has said what he had to. Gaurav Gogoi will go to the voters along with Rahul Gandhi and say, Piyush Goyal has failed, Arun Jaitley has failed, Modi has failed. But it was very clear, Mr. Thadani, was the manner in which the Prime Minister was thumping the table. He was trying to talk up sentiments, It's like when Jayant Sinha is trying to do a corporate deal. He's trying, not in your current avatar, in your previous avatar, he's trying to talk up sentiment, right? He was trying to do a lot of that, thumping the table so hard, sending a message that I like what my batsman is doing. He's like the coach sitting in the dressing room, clapping for his man on the ground.
He did pack a lot in the 110-minute innings that he played. I mean, that we must admit.
So you've heard different voices. You've heard direct criticism from the opposition. You've heard mild criticism from some of the corporates. You've heard some praise as well. We've had some very interesting combinations here on this India Today CII Budget Roundtable. I want to thank all our guests for joining us for this special discussion. Thank you so much for taking out time and staying back for this broadcast. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.